Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, hi, it's Emil.
Yeah, hi, Emil.
How's it going?
Good. Uh, is there any topic from your side?
Um, Actually, no, I've been flat out. Thanks.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
No? Yeah, so may I ask you guys to put your name and like for folks who joined last time, you don't have to fill in all the details with just their name. And if you have any specific topics for today, so please put them. Uh, so we'll start in 2 minutes. I still give people 2 minutes and see if they want to join. Thanks, Josh.
In the OpenTelemetry community document for members, we have a list that has me as approver and Tigran as approver. I don't know that those are sensible anymore these days. I would be happy to be an approver, but I don't think that actually matches what the GitHub state says. It's asking reviewers, Sarah Novotny, Bogdan. Oh, this is a community poll, I'm sorry. Yeah, last time Ted said we should try to have as many approvers and maintainers as we can, so I'm happy to keep myself in there.
Yeah. Okay, we can start. So I'm trying to kick off this effort. So first we need to get people, and I'm proposing that we have Max and me joining as a maintainer and approver for this. And I plan to send the initial PR. I think I can send two PRs in this month. The first one is we have this initial like folder hierarchy for the project. I've done that in Python, and I have understanding of how OpenTelemetry SDK should be organized. So we can kick that off. And also, I'm willing to contribute this trace context implementation. So I've done that several times. I've been a member of the W3C trace context committee, and I worked on the standard test suite, which is used to test several different implementations. That's also on the official trace context repo. So I have done the implementation for OpenConsensus and I'll do that for C++. I hope that we can get people help to review. I'm not very familiar with like the modern build system. I haven't been a C++ engineer for the past few years. So I started as a compiler developer, but really I moved forward to different languages. So I'm willing to learn. I might be like old style C developer. So I look forward for your feedback. And meanwhile, I want to know like who have additional time and can help on the PR review. So I want to see if we got enough population or I need to look for more people.
I'm happy to review.
Okay, that's from Emil, right?
Yep.
I can help out on the review too.
Okay, great. Yeah, that makes me much happier. Currently, I'm worried because I came from the Python community and I host a meeting there together with Chris, and we used to see like 10 or like 20 people there, and now like all like we got started and see less faces, and makes me a little bit worried. We need to get people, but now I have like at least like 2 folks trying to make this happen. So yeah, we'll see how far we can get.
Riley, I noticed that you sent a PR number 3, initial README and contributing documents. Yeah. And the reviewers listed on that PR are 3 people, and I'm confused about that already. If I'm listed as an approver, I should see this. I didn't know this was a PR until just now, for example. I really don't understand how GitHub gets its list of maintainers and approvers.
Okay, I can do that. So there's a trick in GitHub where you can add a specific code owner's file, and
that's what we need. Sorry, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I'll make my second PR on this.
Great.
That's an easy fix, and yeah. So people, please show your activity there. I'll send that in like in 5 minutes after this meeting. Okay, so I've covered all the topics from my side. Anything you want to talk about? I noticed there's one, like on Gitter, people talk about the global tracer. Well, I think it makes more sense for us to cover that in the spec instead of the SDK. So my general understanding is if there's a cross-language design or something big, we should go to the spec and drive for the cross-language thing. And instead of trying to spend energy here, what we do here is we read the spec and follow up and implement that in the SDK. And if we notice some specific challenge in C++, for example, people look for like log-free algorithm, they look for super performance, then we realize, oh, this is something we want to bring back to the spec. Then we should create an issue and join the spec meeting. But instead of trying to drive a specific C++ design, we don't want to diverge from this entire project.
Yeah, on that note, I just updated an OTEP that's been standing for a couple of months on global initialization. I think anyone here should consider reading that. I'll post a link in the chat. But if you're in the OTEP's repo, it's OTEP number 5, and there's a work in progress PR. Just a moment, I'll find the link.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read that. Reason why I mentioned the global singleton is, of course, it's usually super easy to onboard to that, and people do that. And then we encountered where quite interesting combinations of libraries end up in the same process. And with certain initialization order guarantees, it presents a challenge to rework the code of every library. So it's like, anyways, let's discuss this outside of the C++ scope, I guess.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Mutz raised an issue on PR3 about the naming about C versus C++. What do we do? Like who actually needs the C support?
I think we talked about keeping this repo as a C++ SDK and having a very simple C wrapper. And going forward, we're going to split that based on the requirement, but there's no need today. In this case, it makes more sense to call it C++. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. But just for the C support, like the people that have asked for it for open tracing, a few examples are like the Gluster file system. They're all based in C, and PostgreSQL has asked for something like that. It's come up a few times. I don't know if we would plan on developing it concurrently or not, or like finish the C++ API and then start working on it.
And would they
If
be?
you look at the meeting notes from the last meeting, we decided to go with the C++ SDK. And if people need the C API, we'll build a C compatible wrapper on top of the SDK.
So you have a bit more, Ryan, you have a bit more context on like what customers essentially want. Would they be okay with having C++ sort of in the build system?
It varies. So like the person that was working on PostgreSQL, he was able to work with, he was interested in tracing with Jaeger, and he was able to put something together as like a module that loads into PostgreSQL at runtime and uses the underlying C++ tracer. There was some interest in like a complete C stack, and someone from Jaeger actually started developing a C tracer and the C API. It's just a lot of work, and I don't know if anyone.
Question here. So if, say, we have a spec for C API, and we have two implementations. One is binding to the C++ stack, and the other one, for those who actually need like embedded C or something, they have a complete re-implementation in pure C. It's just kind of maintaining one header as a single source of truth, how the API should look like.
I think the API could match, right? It'd just
right. Yes.
Yeah.
So can we start like with this maybe in the C++ repo, and then decide if there is a separate OpenTelemetry C implementation and repo needed, then copy, fork that header, and figure out how to keep them in sync between the two repos?
I guess the question is anyone willing to work to fill out the Open Tracing or the OpenTelemetry C API, like put time into it?
Frankly, for our use cases, for Microsoft internal SDK, we do have C consumers, but to them, it wasn't an issue to link the C++ code within. It's just they wanted a C API, but they could still either dynamically load a C++ library, or they could still figure out how to link the C++ library into their process statically. So there was no need for a pure C implementation.
So did they just roll their own C API on top of the C++ implementation?
It's interesting. Like I actually had to deal with both. Like I did the implementation of C API on top of C++, C89 API. So there was some magic marshalling done from C89's struct, unions and all that, backing a collection of variants into a C++ representation, and then invoking the C++ API.
So it sounds like we should have a C API, and we'll start with a C++ implementation at least.
Yeah, so for going forward, if we plan to onboard Microsoft eventually to OpenTelemetry, yes, it's a requirement. We need a C API as well.
Yeah. That also means like no exceptions as part of the API, right?
Yeah, that's what we follow as well. There's a good pattern in JSON HPP library where they have that macro where you can have your own throw, and your own, it's like, depending on if you are building no except, or if you're building with exceptions, you can customize that behavior in a way. Like, but ideally, no exceptions on API surface. If you guys agree with this,
no exception and no like STL container, those stuff. It's just like plain C API. And
on C, yes. On C API, yes, of course. And on C++, I think we need to discuss. I need to learn a little bit more because I heard about the headers for STL, like if we can rely on something that would be actually, like basically it's like header only dependency on something that can be expressed header only. I think that is appropriate. Generally with STL, we had some compat issues. It's just maybe it's unique to Microsoft and unique to the way how we build our STLs. Our different organizations prefer building STLs differently, rendering it binary incompatible, ABI incompatible one with another. That's where we ended up having it all built from source code for specific org.
All right, guys, it seems like we already made the decision last time. We're talking about.
Yeah, sure. It's just more of a structure, I guess. Where do we want to put it? Let's say we resume all the work on OpenTelemetry CPP and have the header for C in there. And then if there is a need for a pure C implementation, we can decide if a separate repo has to be created for that pure C.
Someone should reply to Mats to this effect then.
Yeah.
Also, my comment there about gRPC, and they decided that they can use more than just STL headers. So I don't know if that informs our decision at all.
I see.
For big things like Office and Edge Chromium based, STL has not been an issue for the biggest traffic producers. And in fact, I was kind of thinking at some point, maybe we should converge from two sides for the two projects using Chromium code base in terms of using one telemetry solution.
Okay, in this case, like for the initial commit, I don't think we're blocked on this topic, but still it's good to track this. And I think having a GitHub issue would be a much better place because not a lot of people would look at this document except for us. I can create one issue to follow up. Okay, anything else? Okay, then we'll just return the 40 minutes to people and I'll work on what the follow-up I have. Meanwhile, if you think about something, for example, we know that like HTTP client is kind of one important thing that we're looking for from Microsoft side. Because when we have this C++ SDK, we use that on iOS, on Windows, and on Linux. And also some people use this on Android environment. And in this case, imagine when the SDK needs to communicate with outside, especially when running on the device scenario. A lot of cases we send data to HTTPS directly to the ingestion service we have in the backend. And I think having that HTTP client library that works across platform and giving people flexibility to replace that would be something we look forward to contribute and work with your guys. It's a critical piece and it's very helpful. And we don't want to just have one developer like Max maintaining that across all libraries and platforms.
Underline, go ahead.
All right.
So just some feedback from our end. So our current telemetry SDK runs on Windows, Linux, Mac, everywhere. So we had a roster of client-supported libcurl on Linux with OpenSSL and optionally GNU-TLS and WinRT, HTTP client, as well as WinNet, and the CPP REST SDK that Microsoft has. But we also ended up having to bind to Apple's HTTP client that comes in their framework. So if we start with a sane structure that identifies like the core interface for an HTTP client, irrespective of where it is bound to, what concrete implementation it is bound to, and then basically describe the contract. And then we can like throw in like 3 or 4 reference implementations and suggest that if you guys need another custom HTTP client library, then you'd have to code it to that interface.
Oh, I can explain a little bit. I think there's some confusion. So this one is not about the HTTP instrumentation. It is about the library that exporters will use to send the data out. And the challenge here we have is we run this SDK on different platforms. For example, people take this C++ SDK and they run on iOS environment, where initially we can see we use libcurl, and people will say, no, we have this native HTTP client which is recommended by Apple. So you guys should just remove that custom implementation and use the standard library. And also you can imagine when we run this on Windows folk will tell us, no, I don't want to use libcurl. I want you guys to use the Windows HTTP client because that one is using the Windows like global proxy setting. And things get even worse if you run the SDK in Android using some like NDK. Then people are saying they want your SDK in C++ to call back, do the reverse GNI, call into the Android Java HTTP library, so that people can pick, like they want to use a specific proxy, they want to use some special like certificate validation. This will be respected by the operating system. So these are the challenge. And given the fact that like most of the the exporters will deal with HTTP, I think probably this is something we can contribute.
This also came up with Envoy, like they have their own infrastructure for making outgoing connections and stuff, and so they weren't keen to have all of libcurl inside of Envoy.
And for things like, let's say, Chromium codebase, Chromium itself has its own HTTP client, so we'd rather bind to that, right? So as long as we have a same definition of a common interface for, I do have a bit of a concern though, like I've been reading about WebSockets, which is a great idea, I mean, for the streaming proposal. Like, man, it's interesting, it's becoming interesting. Like how do we abstract away from just HTTP posts into something universal enough? So internally, we don't do things like as sophisticated as WebSockets yet. Internally, it's mostly HTTP posts of the binary serialized compressed payloads.
Yeah. So currently, there's no action to my understanding. Is there someone who's willing to look into this space and contribute something? If not, probably we can just call the end of this meeting and return the 40 minutes to deal. This is good.
So just on that really quick, you can use HTTP 1.1 streaming with posts too.
Okay.
The only thing is it's not a bidirectional stream. So we discussed it a little bit, and some people were looking for like application level hacking of the spans.
Okay.
But you can't really do it with HTTP 1.1 streaming, but if you're fine with just like dropping spans if they're not.
But my understanding, let's say if you do post OK, right? And you would do the SSL handshake once. So the overhead of whatever headers that you post isn't really that big. So it's like to the client code, it seems like back-to-back HTTP posts. Let's say in some operating systems, you should maintain just 2 simultaneous connections to individual hosts. And basically on 2 connections, you'd be firing back to back. And for anything that hasn't gotten 200 OK, you'd probably have some system to mark those in flight and implement some sort of a retry mechanism just for those spans that have not gotten the 200 OK. Something like this.
Can I speak? I feel like we're talking about how to implement HTTP transport, and it feels out of place for an OpenTelemetry meeting. I know in the other languages we provide this propagator API, we have inject and we have extract, and you can extract from one context, and then there needs to be an example given for every one of these libraries that's out there of like, how do I extract and put it in this specific library's HTTP library's headers? And then you're done. You don't have to do anything more. Is that, am I misunderstanding?
Mostly, yes. That's why when I was speaking about a sane abstraction interface for the HTTP client, like we can actually prescribe a recipe for how that HTTP client bubbles up the response code for a post. So then you can react and have some custom logic on your exporter. If I haven't gotten to 100 OK, what do I do? Do I need to mark that batch for subsequent resend? Or bind some more complex exponential back of retry logic, like if I tried 10 times and I fail, like is it okay for me to drop those things? Like as long as we code the interface that can bind to any concrete implementation of an HTTP client, those things have to be spelled out in the interface spec.
This would be all part of the SDK though, right? Like is the actual transport part of the API at all, or is it just SDK?
It's like
it's outside SDK already.
It's more like internal SDK for SDK developers, no? Like internal set of headers for somebody who's designing an exporter.
So it wouldn't actually be part of the OpenTelemetry.
Yes, yeah, it's like
part of the
internal.
It's part of the exporter API, right? Like if you're writing an exporter, you need to use that API.
Yeah, possibly, yes.
It's kind of a public API then, in my opinion. We can't.
But it's not part of OpenTelemetry, it sounds like. I mean, for example, I know Ryan has worked on transport using libevent. That is a way we send our data to the Lightstep system. And I mean, I guess that's a reusable component. But I originally, when we started this conversation, thought we were talking about how users will instrument their code. And I realized that that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's not about the users instrumenting. It's about exporter, developer, knowing how to design an exporter that deals with specific HTTP stack or like maybe some retry policy specific to that exporter. Second stage, basically not the basic functionality, more like advanced API, although I agree that maybe it's a public API for exporter developers.
There's this proposed protocol called OTLP, I think, from Tigran, and I don't have a strong opinion, but it's been proposed, and it's basically it's got a lot of reliability built into it. And we looked at it, that's Ryan and me, and sort of weren't sure that it was possible to implement using a very low dependency stack, such as libevent. And it worries us that, like, in order to implement OTLP, you've got to have gRPC, for example, right now, which has been a tremendously difficult thing to keep like dependencies sorted for. And it just raises the size of the dependencies, which I know C++ programmers often are trying to eliminate dependencies. So we could have more than one option here. I'm not sure what, if you haven't looked at OTLP, you might take a look, because it does sort of depend on gRPC.
Yeah, I'd love to get up to speed with whatever you guys have. Like internally, I can second that opinion that taking dependencies on something that you don't want has been an issue. Like, for example, we had issues with Boost. People say, hey, my code does not depend on Boost, and I don't want to have any Boost in your project as well. So that has been an issue. Like, and then we said, man, I have to redo all my serializer, deserializer code to avoid using Boost, for example. Yeah, I can feel that pain.
I'll try and find a link to this protocol proposal. But Ryan and Lightstep had been basically lobbying for an alternate, basically something that's much simpler. And we're not sure where that's going, I think, at the moment. You have anything to add, Ryan?
Not much yet, but yeah, I think there's room for multiple transport options.
For now, my suggestion would be we get the link and having some time for people to read and digest that. And for this meeting, I think we don't have additional topics, then we're fine.
For HTTP client, I believe we can share some thoughts, not necessarily like, the final implementation, but some thoughts that do not depend on concrete protocol, like what exact binary serialization protocol we use. So, client is a separate abstraction layer, and then there is a concrete protocol that you would post using that client.
Max, would you follow up and create one GitHub issue, describe this?
I will, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any other topics before we leave? It's probably late for a meal. I see like already got sleep here.
No, it's very early.
Oh, it's too early. Sorry for that. Okay, thanks for joining. And thanks for like having you join us so early, Emil.
I'll try and find that link for OTLP or ask Tigran to post it in Gitter for everybody here.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
You guys have a good one.
Bye.